Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this 140 session in track 2, where we're going to hear from Holly Gabriel and Thomas Dodson from Southern Oregon University. And their topic is Defending Your Rights, Author Agreements, and Open Access. My name is Janine Rockwell Kincannon, and I'm the conference committee member moderating the session. Once again, I'm going to remind you that if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The chat button should be used for general comments or discussion or technical issues. Congratulations to the panelists. And we will, of course, have time for questions at the end. And with that, I'll pass it along to Thomas and Holly.
Great, thank you, Janine. My name is Holly Gabriel, and I'm the Open Access and Government Information Librarian.
I'm Thomas Dodson. I'm the Web and Discovery Librarian at Southern Oregon University. And prior to that, I spent several years managing the DASH repository at Harvard Library's Office for Scholarly Communication.
All right, so today our goals are that you'll learn more about the following: how to understand and evaluate copyright agreements, investigate and interpret a journal's standard copyright policy, the benefits of retaining your rights and making work freely available, how to negotiate your rights with publishers, and how open access policies help authors to retain rights. Next. So we want to provide a quick copyright review. As many of you know, copyright is a bundle of rights held by the author of a work that comes into being automatically the moment that work exists in a fixed form. So that bundle of rights includes the right to distribute, reproduce, create derivative works, and publicly perform and display the work. So just talking about that definition of derivative works and what we mean by that. A derivative work is a work based upon one or more pre-existing works. And so examples could be a translation or a movie script or a musical arrangement. And the key is that the new work must contain major elements of the original work. Next. So now that we've done a quick review of copyright, I'd like to move on to scholarly publishing process, and particularly for a research article. And there are three main versions of a research article. And they include a preprint, a postprint, and the version of record. And so I'd like to go through and talk about each one of these, but I'd like to start with a little bit of audience engagement. And so if you have any characteristics of a preprint, if you could jot that in the chat function. And we'd like to talk about the characteristics of a preprint. I know a couple of you looking at the participants list. And so how about a characteristic of a preprint, such as, is it before or after peer review? If you could just drop your notes in chat. Okay, great. Yeah, before preprint is before the peer review process. Okay, next slide, Tom. So characteristics, whoops.
Sorry.
No problem.
There you
The
go.
characteristics of a preprint, like Kimberly said, include the preprint is the version submitted to a journal by the author. It's before the peer-reviewed process, and it's often called the submitted version or the submitted manuscript. The next item is a postprint. And so if anyone would like to drop a characteristic of a postprint, such as does it or does it not include the journal's formatting? Any characteristics of a post-print? Okay, Samantha's saying it has been reviewed by the journal, the post-print. Anything else? No formatting applied. Right, thanks, Tom. So here on the screen, we can see a post-print is the author's final version, often stored on their desktop or and then it's after refereeing, so after peer review, but it does not include any of the journal's formatting. It's often called the accepted author manuscript, the accepted version, or the final manuscript version. Next slide. And then the third version is the version of record. This is the version as it appears published in the journal. It has the copy editing with the journal's formatting and is often called the published version, final version, or the PDF version. So we'll continue to talk about those throughout the presentation. Next. So why is it important to retain our rights as authors? Well, a few here that are listed include it will allow more people to read, share, and cite your work. Allow readers to print, photocopy, and use your work for teaching purposes and beyond. And ensure you can distribute your work via your institutional repository or your personal or departmental website. Next. So if you and the faculty members that you're working with want to share your research results widely as possible, open access publishing gives readers the most access to your work. Next. So here we have Peter Suber, who gives us a definition of open access by saying open access literature is digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. Peter Suber is a well-known leader in the open access movement. He's a director of the Harvard Open Access Project, and he speaks widely across the United States on open access projects. Next. So we have three main types of open access, and they include gold, green, and hybrid OA. And so I'd like to briefly talk about each one of those. So we start with gold OA, where an author publishes the article in an online open access journal. The article is available upon publication with no subscription required. The authors might pay an article processing charge. However, it's usually not the author themselves that pays that charge. It can be paid by a funding agency or by the university. For example, an author might include in a grant proposal in their proposed budget, they include the article processing charges. Or if the author's university pays that APC, it's nice because the university does not need to pay a library subscription for the open access journal. So it's kind of a trade-off there when the university pays the APC, but not a library subscription. And then examples of gold OA include Public Library of Science and Biomed Central, who are both gold open access publishers. Next. Okay, so let's talk about green open access. This is the model where an author self-archives materials at the repository level. So the authors share a version of their article in alignment with a licensing agreement in an institutional or disciplinary repository. The licensing agreement may require an embargo, which is the time period before making the article public. And examples of green OA include University of Oregon Scholars Bank, digital access to scholarship at Harvard, and disciplinary repositories such as archive.org. Next. And finally, we have hybrid OA. And this is where non-open access journals may offer an option for an article, for an author to make an individual article freely accessible, but they have to pay an additional fee. And unfortunately, other articles in the same journal remain accessible only through a subscription. This may result in the author or the author's institution paying twice to access that material. So like we heard in the lightning talk by Miriam, this is not the ideal model of OA, and hybrid OA is sometimes referred to as pseudo OA because of this. And some faculty are only familiar with this method of making works openly available and may think that this is what librarians always mean when we use the term open access. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Tom, who will discuss some tools about investigating journals' policies.
Great, thanks. I'm going to stop sharing or change the sharing real quick so I can close out some windows that are in my way. But it sounds like some folks from based on the lightning talk, are already well familiar with the Sherpa Romeo database. But I thought it would be useful for us to demonstrate it for those who are not. Essentially, it's a open database, doesn't require a subscription. Allows you to find the terms of a journal publisher's standard licensing agreement, which is to say most journals, don't reinvent the wheel. Journal publishers don't reinvent the wheel for every journal or for every contract with faculty author. Those things are generally standardized, and include those contracts also include information or include a statement of what what rights the author retains to be able to self-archive their work. And the Sherpa Romeo database displays that information in a way that's much clearer, at least in my experience, than sitting down and trying to read the actual contract. And it also includes information about paid access options, that's to say hybrid OA, when that's something that the publisher makes available. So we're going to look at two journals, one open access and one not. The first one of these is PLOS Biology. This slide is just a quick summary of what you'll find on Sherpa Romeo about this, but I'm actually going to go and show you on in the database itself. And then this is a more conventional journal, Chemistry and Ecology, which has a bunch of sort of limitations on distribution. So I'm going to stop sharing this and start sharing something else. Okay, so this is, I'm in Sherpa Romeo, and if you haven't used it before, it's pretty straightforward for searching, right? Like you can put in a journal title or ISSN or the name of a publisher, since you can look up Wiley and then you can see all the journals they publish, choose the journal you're interested in looking at. So when I was working at for the Office for Scholarly Communication, we would put things into the repository. We would consult this all the time just to see what what we were allowed to do based on the standard license agreement with the the document provided to us by the faculty. Could we put it in the repository, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an OA journal, and here the icons, you get used to those, but essentially it says this pathway includes open access publishing, and this is specifically referring to the published version. So there's no embargo on that. It uses the Creative Commons by license, so attribution is required. And it can be deposited. This is again referring to the published version, the final published version, on any website, in PubMed Central, a journal website. The only condition being that the author you have to publish, you have to refer to the published source in a form of a citation. The accepted version, what we were calling preprint, the author's final manuscript, also can be distributed with no embargo, self-archive, on any website. And the submitted version can be placed in a preprint repository if that's something that the author wants to do, or if that's something that's typical in their field, like in physics, for example. Okay, so another example is chemistry and ecology, which is much more restrictive, not an OA journal. So if we look at the published version and what the author can do with that, it is going to say that there's a pathway to open access, and that's true, but it's hybrid open access, and it's associated with an open access fee. So if that's paid, then and the fee is paid and the hybrid OA is granted, there's no embargo. And then at that point, any website, a number of repositories, and can be places where you deposit it. And then there are two pathways for the accepted version, which we're calling the postprint. If where the author wants to put it is an institutional or a subject repository, they need to put it under an embargo for 12 months. But however, here in pathway B, accepted version, author's homepage, if they're just putting it on their personal site, although they're asked to link to the publisher's version with DOI and to a set statement, they can do that without embargo. And just real quick, the way that we would handle that, like at our repository, many of you will be familiar with, we just deposit it. If it's under an embargo, we'll basically make the metadata available, deposit the file dark. In this case, the final manuscript version we got from the author, and then release the access to the file after 12 months so that other folks can get it. So what we thought might be interesting, particularly for those who are not familiar with this database, would be to go to the URL, which Holly, do you want to just drop the URL in chat? That way it's a little bit more accessible than on my screen. Go to Sherpa Romeo, and likely there's some of us are faculty librarians who publish in library journals. Many of us are liaisons with departments who have faculty who regularly publish in journals that we're familiar with. I thought it'd be interesting for Holly and I thought it would be interesting if you'd be willing to do a search in Sherpa Romeo for a journal that's relevant to you, and then maybe one or two of you could share the results with us, particularly if you find something interesting or surprising in the results. And I'm going to stop sharing. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to do that. And Janine, can folks turn their mics on if they want to and tell us about it, or does it need to happen through chat?
That is a very good question.
I don't want to put any pressure on anybody. It can go, I mean, chat's fine, but if someone wanted to speak, that's great too.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question in the Q&A that you might answer while we're waiting. How often does Sherpa Romeo update their publisher information?
I don't know. I remember when this was back in the day, when I was doing this, but we usually could count on it being up to date for any given search. So they must do it pretty regularly, but I don't know that frequency actually. Holly, did you encounter that in any of your research?
I think it's updated regularly, but I'm not sure exactly how often.
Yes, I see someone in the chat also confirming that indeed they find that it's very quick. Yeah. Okay. Well, did anyone find anything that they want to mention in the chat about searching for journals that are relevant to them? If not, we can move on to the next thing. Okay, Holly, shall we move on?
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so I'll hand it back to you.
All right, so like we said earlier, some main reasons to negotiate your author's rights include allow more people to read and share your work, make it easier for instructors and colleagues to assign and discuss your work in class, and gain more citations due to wider availability. The majority of studies on the OA citation advantage do suggest that the citation advantage exists for open access. All right, next slide. And negotiating with publishers, don't be afraid to ask for changes. It's not like they're going to pull your article once they've decided that they're going to accept it. So it's okay to negotiate. Make a list of the rights you want to retain before the negotiation begins. This can be helpful if you know that you want to share your article on your institutional repository, for example. Be knowledgeable about your institution's OA policy if you have one, because that will really streamline the process. And there's 2 Spark tools that are available to you and faculty, including the Author Addendum tool and the Spark Author Rights brochure. And so I'd like to share my screen to show those tools. Okay, so here is the Spark Author Addendum tool. And SPARC stands for the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. You might be familiar with the work that they do regarding open educational resources. And they've partnered with Creative Commons to create some resources, including the SPARC Author Addendum tool here at the top. And so I'll open that in a new tab. So hopefully you're seeing a description of the Author Addendum tool, that it's a legal instrument that you can use to modify your copyright transfer agreement. And you would only use this in a case of a non-open access journal publisher. So if you're publishing in an open access journal, you wouldn't need to use this Author Addendum tool. Okay, so the Author Addendum tool, you can either download a PDF and fill it out that way, or you can complete the Author Addendum tool online. So I'm going to click on the online version. And like I said, this will be a quick way for you as an author to retain some of your rights. And so this is a Scholars Copyright Addendum Engine, and it gives a quick description here. What I wanted to demonstrate is that it's fairly quick and easy to fill this out as an author. And so the description is each addendum gives you non-exclusive rights to that bundle of rights. And the difference between the 4 types of here is that they differ with respect to how soon you can make the final published version available, and whether you authorize others to reuse your work in various ways. And so I'll let you kind of read through these choices here between access, reuse, immediate access, delayed access, and then an additional MIT copyright amendment. And this, according to the description here, is for MIT authors for their publications. And so really just focusing on these top three. So I would like to give a quick demonstration of instructions for using this author addendum. And it does sound like it will be updated soon. So the first step here is to enter your manuscript title. And I my browser is remembering some of the examples that I typed in previously here. And so I'll go ahead and fill that in. The publisher here is Emerald. And then I get to choose my agreement type based on the descriptions up here on the page. And I'll choose delayed access. That's referring to the journal's version of record. And then hit generate addendum. And I get a PDF version. Hopefully you're seeing this PDF that was generated quite quickly with the appropriate information. And then I can find out what rights I've retained as an author. And so, for example, that delayed right was authorizing the version of record with an embargo of 6 months. And so then I can print this out, sign and date it, and then attach it to my publishing agreement. Okay. So that is the Spark author addendum that you can either fill out online or print as a PDF and then fill out. I'd also like to talk about the brochure, the author addendum brochure. And this can be helpful if you're working with faculty. This can be a resource that you can share with your faculty, and you can either view it as an HTML or a PDF. I'll click on the HTML, so I'll scroll down and you can see some of the major headings of the brochure. It's good information, not only for you as an author, but also for sharing with faculty that you work with. And so now at this point, I would like to stop sharing and hand it back to Tom, who will talk about some information about funding agencies as well as university open access policy.
Thanks. So Holly has done most of the yeoman's work or young person's work of kind of giving us the full context of open access. What I want to talk about mostly is what it was kind of like on the ground administering Harvard's open access policy, but talking about that more broadly in the context of policies, we should mention that you know, as many of you are going to be familiar with, the NIH, the National Science Foundation, the Institute of Education Sciences, all have policies that require deposit in certain institutional repositories of work that they fund. So if you want more information about that, Sherpa Juliet, a version of Sherpa Romeo, can give you that information. But what I want to talk about is how a Harvard-style open access policy works, and both kind of practically, not so much legally, I guess, because we had an attorney, Kyle Courtney, who could help with that. I'm not an attorney, but I did kind of do the day-to-day parts of it and explain it to faculty and graduate students. So essentially, what the policy does is grants the institution certain non-exclusive rights to future scholarly articles published by the faculty at that institution. So the two key things there are non-exclusive, which is to say it doesn't restrict who else the author might want to give rights to, or whether or not the author wants to exercise those rights themselves. It's non-exclusive. It doesn't place limitations on anything. And it's the right to future articles. So it's not, it doesn't go retroactive from when the particular faculty author joins the faculty. But the timing of this does actually matter, but it's not so much about the timing of hire. It also requires deposit in the institution's repository of the final manuscript version, the postprint. And so it facilitates green OA. It's really what it's for. Harvard style OA policy is what's called an opt-out policy, which means that the default is that permission is granted for open access to the institution, that non-exclusive license is granted by default, and that if faculty want to not have their article distributed in the repository under the open access policy, they have to take some action. So the kind of friction is on the side of getting out of it. And we'll explain shortly that that's not really a kind of inconvenience as some folks might think it could be. So the way one does that is authors have the option to opt out of the license by requesting a waiver. And I'll talk about that in more detail. And essentially, the great thing about this is that there's no need if the rights that the author wants are the ability to distribute it in an institutional repository, their website, and so on. There's no need to negotiate with publishers to make sure that their licensing agreement retains that right. These are actually, I actually can't see my own slide, just a moment. Yeah, these rights are effectively granted when Harvard takes the non-exclusive license to exercise certain of that bundle of copyrights. They also include and the ability to authorize others. And the whole reason for that is effectively those rights are granted right back to the author. So again, that's the kind of the legal thaumaturgy of that is a little beyond me. But in practice, we were always confident telling our faculty, you can exercise these same rights that Harvard's exercising to distribute your work open access, and that it's not going to result in copyright infringement, even if you sign a licensing agreement with a publisher that was more restrictive than that. So that's kind of, again, so by virtue of the policy, faculty authors retain certain rights to their work, including rights that they might have transferred away in the license agreement. So here's how that magic happens. Well, actually, that's I'll talk about that first. So the timing is that whenever a Harvard-style open access policy is passed at an institution, it takes effect the moment that it's passed. So if it was passed in February 2nd, 2013, then it takes effect at that moment, and for all subsequent scholarly articles published by someone who joins the faculty or who is already on the faculty. So because of that, by definition, any publishing agreement for a future article that a faculty member enters into with a publisher, fills out that standard licensing agreement, the policy still happened on February 12th, 2013 or whatever. So any licensing agreement by definition happens subsequent to that and cannot take back rights that the author has already given to Harvard or the institution by virtue of placing so many limitations on the author's exercise of their copyrights that they're not allowed any longer to let Harvard or the relevant institution distribute. So essentially, the way I described it is it trumps the standard author agreement that the faculty member makes with their publisher. So yeah, you signed a thing that said they have exclusive rights, the publisher has exclusive rights, but they really don't, because this thing took effect before that thing did. The policy took effect before the contract did. So some other things to keep in mind about a policy like this is that it's not something that's imposed upon the faculty by the administration. It's not like the provost said, okay, we're all going to be open access, and that's a condition of your employment here. Rather, it's something that is discussed and debated and then passed by the relevant faculty body. Should we ever get one here at SOU? I've just started here and we're talking about how to go about make that happen. It would be our faculty senate. At Harvard, each college had its own faculty body that made these kind of decisions. So we had to do it school by school by school. But yeah, so as I mentioned, the university's right to distribute that work is granted as soon as the policy is passed. And so it secures authors' right without the faculty author needing to take any additional action. So they don't need the Spark addendum, for example, if the rights they're really interested in are being able to distribute it in the repository. A question that often came up was, well, how do we handle co-authored papers? That was never a problem. And essentially what we did is, we told faculty authors with co-authors, if you got a Harvard author, just as a courtesy, tell your co-authors that this policy exists. And if they have any questions, they can talk to us in the Office for Scholarly Communication. And usually wasn't a problem. If you had a co-author who objects, it's not a problem to exercise the provision in the policy for getting a waiver. And also just a note that this only applies to, the policy only applies to scholarly articles and not to books and other works. So the waiver thing, we get a lot of questions about that as well. So the university license granted by the policy can be waived, but only on an article by article basis. The faculty member can't get a blanket, a global waiver of the policy for all future articles. It has to be on an article by article basis. And even when that waiver is granted, it doesn't waive the author's commitment to place to give us the metadata and to place the file, allow us to place the file in the repository under dark deposit, which is to say the file is there, it's in the repository, but we don't make it available for folks to download or access. And that if so if it was like the journal that we looked at a moment ago in Sherpa Romeo, the Chemistry and Ecology Journal, we would and the author waived the policy, we would then abide by the standard license agreement and deposit the that file dark until the 12-month embargo had passed. We've been talking about the published version here, but once that embargo had passed, we would release it and make it visible, downloadable. But the metadata, it would always be discoverable in the repository, and the metadata would be there. So the important things about a waiver that really kind of settled our faculty down about it was that we made it very easy to apply for a waiver. We just had a web form that was no more complicated than the one that Holly demonstrated. Just basic bibliographic information and who the faculty member is. And then we would always grant them. There was no need to justify or explain or anything like that. The waiver came into our office. The web form came into our office. We printed out a form. We put it in our campus mail to the faculty member the same day, generally. So we always had tried to emphasize the faculty, like, look, you can make a choice to waive any articles. You just can't do it globally. You have to do it one at a time. And in that case, when a policy like this is waived, the self-archiving rights become those that are set up in the license agreement with the publishers. And as we saw from looking at Sherpa Romeo, in many cases, it's still possible to deposit some version in the repository based on the rights retained by the author in the license agreement, even if a policy like this is in place but has been waived. And then another concern people sometimes raise is like, well, aren't all faculty, if you made it so easy, and if that's all they have to do to get out of it, do you expect that you're just going to be kind of overwhelmed with waiver requests if you have a policy like this? That's not been our experience. We have this kind of policy at Harvard and MIT, and last time I checked, the waiver rate for articles is about 5%. And in my experience in the office, it was never a big deal getting those processed. It wasn't the standard thing. It was much more difficult, the challenge getting the author's final manuscript version, as you can imagine. So it's the last sort of set of things I have to say about how a policy like this works, or at least how it worked when I was helping with it. There was initially Stuart Cheever, God bless him, thought at first that we might have all the faculty go into DSpace, or I guess some folks would be Content DM, the equivalent, and type in the metadata. We were quickly disabused of that idea and realized that we had to make it very easy for faculty to deposit. So we did that in a couple of ways. One was we created a web form called a quick submit form, which just asked for the absolute basic, the title, the journal name, and the author's name and the file, and that's it. And then we would, the Office for Scholarly Communication and our student workers would do the rest. We track down the rest of the metadata, and we make the deposit on the faculty member's behalf. To make sure that everybody knew that that was legitimate, we would have the faculty complete, also as like a web form, a one-time assistance authorization form that just said, it's okay for the following people that I explicitly list and folks in the Office for Scholarly Communication. And so it could be, if you're doing this kind of policy, it could be just the librarians, student workers, whoever they want to designate, can do this for me. And they don't need to do that for every article. It's a one-time form, but and then we would just put that on put that on file and know that we could put anything in the repository that they gave us without worrying about not being the proper person to exercise those rights. And also, even at one point, we were pulling in things. We could pull things in from other repositories like PubMed. We could pull things from. We had an agreement with the Provost Office to pull in final manuscript versions that were included in submissions for promotion or whatever, like the yearly report. So as long as we had an assistance authorization form, the issue was never a faculty member being concerned about having wider distribution for their work. The concern was just like, please don't make me do another thing. Like, I'm busy. So as long as we could, it's not like we were, trampling anybody's rights. But I just find that was the thing that was really effective for us, was to just say, please just let us do it. So along those lines, practically the best time to deposit is right when the article is accepted for publication, sometime between then and when the article is published. And that's largely just practical because faculty move on. Those of us who write articles and things, you maybe don't know where the final manuscript version of something from a year ago is on your machine. And also the people helping you might not know that. So we would try to encourage folks to give us that file that we needed within that time frame. So, I will hand it back over to Holly.
Great. So we list our references, including 2 books by Peter Suber, which are excellent reference points for learning more about open access, and as well as 2 articles about the open access citation advantage. Next slide. So I did see that Samantha put in chat that she looked in Sherpa Romeo for the International Journal of Cultural and Religious Studies. So Samantha, were there any questions about that, or would you like us to show that as an example? Well, Tom, you could go to our next slide so that people get our contact information, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have. Our email is listed there too.
We do have a question in the Q&A. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
And would you read it aloud, please, for the recording?
Sure. So as you were showing the Spark Addendum tool, you selected a delayed option under the CC choices. I've come across some publications, so far this is rare, in which they decree additional restrictions, such as an embargo, to a final published version under a gold open access CC license. This seems to go against the whole purpose of the CC licensing baseline of open accessibility. Marianne Liebert Incorporated was an example of one such publisher, but they have corrected this since last fall. is this restriction what was being indicated in your addendum, for example, or was this publisher behaving badly? I believe that that was the restriction that I was showing in the example that I gave, was the embargo on the publisher's version. And I can go back and share my screen. Whoops.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
I'll just say real quick that my first feeling about this is, yeah, that is to agree. Yeah, that does seem weird for an open access journal to operate that way. However, so much of what we really want from, let me start again. The difference between a post-print, right, and the final published version is fundamentally copywriting, branding, and graphic design. The intellectual content of the work should already be fully there in the final manuscript version. So in general, we consider them, when we were doing this work for the repository, we considered them equivalent. It's easier, if it's easier to get the manuscript version, then let's get that, because the difference between the two shouldn't be really significant. It might be significant to a publisher who doesn't want something with their logo on it widely distributed without them knowing about it. But I don't think we would worry too much about it in terms of if we were allowed to distribute the manuscript version, final manuscript version, not being able to distribute the published version. But I agree, that does seem weird to me.
Yeah, and a lot of us will add our post prints to our institutional repository or our own personal author website, but we are fine with the embargo on the journal's final version, the journal's article of record. And so, as long as you're able to share your own post print, I think that's good.
Yeah, I mean, it is true also that it makes sort of, it does sort of make it easier for purposes of citation for the person who's trying to cite your work if they've got the final manuscript version. A little less consulting of the style manual to figure out how to cite the post-print.
All right, any other comments or questions?
I have a question about the enforcement is not quite the word that I want, but communication to the faculty that this is an expectation. I'm sure that you had faculty who didn't pay attention to the open access mandate. And so you say that, the earliest that they can send it, the post print in, and then up to the date of publication. But how do you see I suppose you're doing a tracking of Harvard University authorship and making sure that those things actually make it in, yes?
Yes.
Kind of a policing thing.
Well, I don't know if I put it that, but it's more like we don't necessarily rely on the faculty to be paying a lot of attention to this.
Right.
Some do, and in fact, we don't want them to have to think about it. So, like I said, we would get some, annual reports from the provost, and then, knowing that those were subject to the policies, if we didn't have a waiver on file for a particular article, we're like, okay, they didn't request a waiver. This is subject to the policy. We would see, what version we could get our hands on. And that process is facilitated a little bit at Harvard that faculty have faculty assistants. So if we had an assistant authorization on file, it's a little less intimidating to tell a faculty assistant, hey, we need these manuscripts for the repository. Also, for folks who are publishing in places, like people who are publishing with like NIH funded research, where we already knew, we would harvest that. And again, if we had an assistance authorization on file, there was no need to to even contact the faculty member if they didn't, if we, there's just no need to do that. What we would do is, we communicate with faculty in lots of ways. What we'd be more likely to do is, let's say we put up something like that we got some other way. We'd contact them and say, hey, 300 people read your article this week. And then they'd be like, really? And then that might become someone who became interested in actively helping us get their work into the repository. Or one of the things that I love that the Dash does, I don't remember, somebody, it was one of the four of us who came up with this idea, I don't remember who, but to actively solicit stories from people about how they were using the articles. And we have this great sort of set of testimonials. I still say we, because I still identify strongly with that work, but so the Dash Repository, they've got tons of statements from, the one that I remember most clearly was a physician working in an African country who didn't have institutional access to certain articles related to the treatment of HIV, and had found them in Dash, and had been able to develop some procedures based on that. Or general citizens, or I mean, all the kind of the kind of hypothetical OA things that we talk about, like, well, it's for this kind of person and it's for that kind of person. We would get essentially thank you notes from people all the time. And I highly recommend that to folks who have a repo up and running. Like ping your users and ask them who they are and what they're using this access for. It's certainly nice to hear, and it also really helps debunk arguments that it's not being used effectively, and also for your own kind of promotion of the repository and drawing attention to the significance of what you're doing.
Other questions from attendees?
And I'll just say I'm really looking forward to the talk at 3 o'clock to see what they're doing with their open access policy. That'll be really interesting.
Right, yeah, from the University of Oregon. That's good timing that we were back to back. So I'm looking forward to listening to their presentation as well.
Okay. I am just checking one more time. Okay, no more questions. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you so much to Holly and Thomas. And just as a timekeeping thing, we've got our next session up at 3 o'clock. So a nice lengthy break to go take a walk. Thank you so much.